Our theme this month is when we name it, we claim it. And today's topic is what is behind the mask. During this month, we have been exploring the concept that who and what we call ourselves or others, that is what we label or name. That is what we claim for ourselves and for others. It's kind of a squirmy thing, isn't it? Squirmy was a word I really was hesitant about using, but it kept popping up in my mind, even though it doesn't pop up in the dictionary. A squirmy thing. On the one hand, those so-called labels are descriptive, aren't they? Words that others understand what we mean. On the other hand, they are conclusions, true or false, positive or negative, but what we believe to be clearly communicated to others accurately. Joseph Campbell, mythologist, writer, and lecturer, was an American professor of literature at Sarah Lawrence College for over 40 years, and he worked in comparative mythology and comparative religion. His works cover many aspects of the human experience. His philosophy is often summarized by his phrase, "Follow your bliss." Most of us remember him as the result of a series of interviews conducted by Bill Moyer, and which were televised by PBS, Public Broadcasting System, in a 6-hour series in 1987. Campbell's conversations with Moyers, titled Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth, are widely recognized as a seminal guide to understanding mythology's role in both past and contemporary life. Campbell's work also played a strong, influential role in the narrative development of George Lucas' Star Wars franchise. In fact, some of those conversations between Moyer and Campbell took place at George Lucas' Skywalker Ranch. Skywalker Ranch is a movie ranch and a workplace of film directors, writers, and producers, including George Lucas. It's located in a secluded yet open area near Nicasio, California, which is in Marin County, north of San Francisco. Those interviews were subsequently edited for publication as the book titled The Power of Myth, and in it is a chapter titled Masks of Eternity, which is why I have commented about the above information that I've just given you. Because today's topic, what is behind the mask, in as far as the spiritual being having a human experience is concerned, is an integral part of what we name and claim about ourselves and others. And in reading Masks of Eternity, we discover that we are not the first in history to do so. So let's begin by using as an example of that the approaching holiday this week, which we call Halloween. It's highly likely that the vast majority of children and their parents have no idea of the concept of Halloween or its history. Because you see, it goes back to before the creation of Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, M&M's, Chips Ahoy, and Hershey's Kisses as gifts to the Halloween trick-or-treaters. And it's also likely that they don't really know the history of why they dress up in costumes and masks, beyond the reality that the costume is a hand-me-down from an older sibling, or it was the first one they saw when they walked into Walmart or Ross. So let's explore what's behind the mask in the celebration called Halloween. The tradition originated with the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, when people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off ghosts. The evening before was originally known as All Hallows' Eve. So one might deduce from that the costumes and the masks worn were protection from being recognized by whatever that culture identified as a ghost. The Celts, who lived 2,000 years ago, mostly in the area that is now Ireland, the United Kingdom, and northern France, celebrated their new year on November 1st. So this might be likened to today's celebration of what we call New Year's Eve. In the 8th century, though, Pope Gregory III designated November 1 as a time to honor All Saints. All Saints' Day incorporated some of the traditions of Samhain. The evening before was known as All Hallows' Eve, and later Halloween. It struck me that took on some semblance of when you name it, you claim it. And as a result, it took on some semblance of a religious celebration. All well and good. How did it end up in the United States, in the state of Hawaii, and in the Waikoloa Village Shopping Center on October 31st every year? The celebration of Halloween was extremely limited in colonial New England because of the rigid Protestant belief systems there. Halloween was much more common in Maryland, for example, in the southern colonies in the early days of the United States. As the beliefs and customs of different European ethnic groups and the American Indians began to mesh, a distinctly American version of Halloween began to emerge. The first celebrations included play parties, which were public events held to celebrate the harvest. Neighbors would share stories of the dead, tell each other fortunes, and dance and sing. Colonial Halloween festivities also featured the telling of ghost stories and mischief-making of all kinds. By the middle of the 19th century, annual autumn festivities were common, but Halloween was not yet celebrated everywhere in the country. In the second half of the 19th century, though, America was flooded with new immigrants. These new immigrants, especially the millions of Irish fleeing the Irish potato famine, helped to popularize the celebration of Halloween nationally. Borrowed from European traditions, Americans began to dress up in costumes and go house to house asking for food or money, a practice that eventually became trick-or-treat tradition. As we know, seldom if ever does the, quote, warding off of ghosts enter the picture in the celebration of Halloween now, nor does the concept of Pope Gregory's decree of honoring all saints occur, which is another way of saying what's behind the mask evolves, or at least it can when we look at life evolving and our own evolution personally. Now, going back to what Joseph Campbell called the mask of eternity, there is a similar theme to our discussion last Sunday about the way Emma Curtis Hopkins described how parallels in truth and actions show up in different cultures, races, religions, and philosophies. Bill Moyer asks Campbell, as you've moved among various worldviews, dipping in and out of cultures, civilizations, and religions, have you found something in common in every culture that creates the need for God? Campbell's answer is lengthy, but I will encapsulate it here by commenting that he reminds us, quote, there is a dimension of the universe that is not available to our senses. And yet, as I read that, I realized that in every culture, in every spiritual teaching, in every civilization, there is a pathway to realizing there is beauty and wonder in existence. And these are all personifications of the ultimate source of energy. And Campbell reminds us, man's tendency, however, is to personify such experiences, to attempt to anthropomorphize natural courses and forces. That is, regarding human rights, emotions, or intentions in non-human entities. We might describe that as not being able to see beyond the end of our nose, which is not unlike wearing a mask, when behind the mask is you, me, each individually created part of the whole. Like Emma Curtis Hopkins, as I mentioned a few moments ago, Campbell refers not only to other cultures and races, but also to other religions and philosophies. From the Christian faith, he reminds us to live out of the sense of Christ. That is what he calls the Christ consciousness in us. From Gnosticism and Buddhism, that these ideas have embodied themselves in the human who reconciles humankind with God. From a Hindu saying, none but a God can worship a God. Campbell clarifies that statement by explaining, we are God, not in our ego, but in our deepest being, where we are at one with the non-dual transcendent. Let me translate that phrase, non-dual transcendent. Beyond or above the range of normal or merely physical human experience, surpassing the ordinary, exceptional. In closing, I would like to share with you that in our deepest being, that is to say, behind the masks many of us wear at one time or another in this journey we call life, we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. We are all imbued with non-dual transcendence when and if we invoke it. And when we name it so, we claim, and so it is.